probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here, back again for another edition of Summer School. That's our college football preview series on the Cover 3 podcast. And today, it's one of college football's blue bloods. That's Nebraska. Husker 247, my man, Brian Christopherson, back again on Cover 3. Brian, welcome back, dude.
Thanks for inviting me back, bud. It's you don't always count on the getting invited back to something, you know. So I'm glad to join the party one more time.
You guys are on a great board, man, and a great site. Like it's you know, if you give a Nebraska take, it a damn sure better be informed because you will hear about it on Husker 247 with all your members. So
that's true.
We got to have Brian on because I got to give educated takes.
Well, I'll do my best, and if I suffer at all, people will call me out on it. I'll guarantee you that. So let's roll.
Let's do this thing. All right. So first off, always ask about coaching changes. Any significant coaching changes for Nebraska this year, and if so, how will they look different on the field as a result?
Yeah, the big change is Glenn Thomas is working. He was brought in. He's familiar with Matt Rule's staff. He coached with him at Baylor. Coached with him at Temple. He did a really nice job with Charlie Brewer when the Baylor Bears had their success sort of building that thing up. He got Brewer when he was a freshman quarterback and did some nice things, which is kind of a nice parallel when you got the Dylan Raiola situation going on here. Marcus Satterfield's still the offensive coordinator. He's coaching the tight ends. They're a staff that's, even though Glenn Thomas is new to Nebraska, they're very synced together. Sat and Glenn Thomas have coached a long time together as well. And so that's a relationship Matt Rule feels really comfortable about. And I think he kind of has it like pieced together now, sort of almost like how they might have wanted it last year, but didn't have it. And now it is. So we'll see where it goes.
Where is this team most improved from last year?
Quarterback. I mean, they went after Jeff Sims and it didn't work out. I mean, he's a good teammate, a good young guy, but it just didn't go well. The turnovers were ridiculous. If you look at Nebraska's numbers, they had 31 giveaways, just a lot of unforced errors from the QB spots. Heinrich Harburg, took over in the middle of last year, and he's a really good runner and a great athlete, but had a 49% completion percentage. So Nebraska was just no threat in the intermediate passing game. Enter Raiola, who is, of course, the five-star, and he's hit the ground running, had a really good spring. Obviously, everybody knows there's going to be some potholes that pop up here and there for a young quarterback. But I think the common thought is that Raiola is probably going to be the starter when the opener happens. Harburg's improved a lot, too. I got to give him a lot of credit. He looked a lot better throwing the ball in the spring, and I think Glenn Thomas has been really good for him. But Dylan showed his stuff in the spring game, and from all we heard, he did really well in the scrimmages too. He just has asserted himself well. He I think impressed his teammates off the bat by just going to work and kind of shedding the I'm the five-star guy. That wasn't a big deal. It's just like I got to go prove myself to a new group of guys, and be there. If guy wants to throw at 6 a.m., I'm there working with him, that sort of thing. And so I think he's made the right first impressions.
Let's go to Indianapolis. Who's a guy who you would not expect to be voted first or second team All Big Ten in the preseason, but may have a shot to be there come the postseason edition of that award?
Yeah, Isaac Gifford would be a good example of that. He's probably the alpha dog on the defense. People maybe sleep on that defense a bit. This was a top 10 defense in most every category. I mean, Tony White in his first year, he got him to ninth in run defense, seventh in yards per pass attempt given up, 11th in total defense. Gifford is that safety rover guy who just sets the tone. He's not afraid to, I think call guys out when he has to, and just be that leader that people look to as an example. So I'd say Gifford, and the other guy as I throw in as a wild card is cornerback Tommy Hill, who is a freak athlete. 4-star recruit. He's kind of had the bumps in the road during his career, but he settled in the last month of the season, and they're really hoping that he takes off as sort of that number one corner who can lock down guys.
As an Orlando guy, I'm very familiar with Hill, and Yeah, like I'm glad to hear he's finally reaching his potential because he was a guy that could play both sides of the ball, and it was just clear like if you could ever put it together, there was some real like NFL type upside there. So that's pretty encouraging. Where are their deepest positions on this team?
Defensive line is where I'd start. Nash Hutmaker is a defensive tackle who just took his game to another level. They call him the polar bear. So that's fun. People enjoy that. But he's the guy who just eats up space. He can collapse the pocket, just causes all sorts of trouble. Good run stuffer. He's become an every down player. So he's a guy who he doesn't get as much attention, honestly, probably as some Husker fans think he should in the preseason stuff, who I think you might see on postseason ballots. They also have Ty Robinson, who's a guy who's been around this program like 5 years, and he could have been an NFL draft pick, but decided to stay one more season. And then a guy people don't know as much about outside our bubble is he led the team in sacks and TFLs. I think if the D line and this defense is going to get takeaways, Jamari Butler is going to be a big part of that, just causing some havoc. I think he's that kind of guy who can be a game wrecker if he can take his game up one more notch.
What are the fall position battles that you're going to be monitoring most closely?
Running back's really interesting. They've had injuries there. It was part of where the deck was probably stacked against Satterfield a little bit last year, as he lost like 2 or 3 offensive linemen to injury in the middle of the year. He lost 2 of his best running backs in September. And Gabe Irvin is now back from injury. He's a kid that's out of Buford, the powerhouse program in Georgia. He's had 2 significant injuries, but when he's healthy, he's shown that he could really be kind of a rugged back who maybe is that fourth quarter guy that leans on people. Ramir Johnson is another guy who's like a 5th or 6th college year player. He's had big games in his past against like Oklahoma's and Michigan type programs. He can do a little bit of everything. He's also dealt with the injury bug, though. They're back in the summer and fall. The big question is if Nebraska can get full availability out of those guys for a full year, have it where it all works out and they're just out there. And then the interesting guy last year was Emmett Johnson, who was like 5th on the depth chart in fall camp. Nobody was really thinking about him. Injuries kind of brought him into the equation. And he showed a nice little burst and he looked good. It's a good running back room. The question everybody around here has is, can someone be great? Can you find someone that's dynamic, that takes, that 3-yard play and makes it a 6-yard play, or it makes an occasional 5-yard play, a 50-yard play? And that's sort of what they've lacked, I think, really since, I would dare say, Amir Abdullah. Like, you almost have to go back to him, where I feel like Nebraska had that type of running back. And so the question is if they can find that, or if it's going to be sort of I think it's going to need all 3 of those guys as a combination platter sort of to make it work. But we'll see if someone kind of emerges as a lead dog there.
Do you expect the defense to continue to be better than the offense despite the improvement?
Yeah. They want to be the top defense in the country. They say it with some humility, knowing that they've got to put in a lot of work, but they do have a lot of parts back on the defensive line, as I mentioned. On the back end, at least on the front line with their safeties and corners, they've got players they feel like can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the Big Ten. And they were top 10 in almost every statistic in Tony White's first year. I mean, the biggest thing that happened for Nebraska football, besides the quarterback addition, was Tony White, who was courted by some big-time programs. UCLA had him, I think, on their short list for a head coaching job, and he's back for a second year. So there's kind of this feeling like, okay, everybody knows what to expect. They understand his 3-3-5 scheme really well and how it bends and all the different parts of it. You've got a lot of guys who are 4th, 5th-year guys in that defense. This should be able to take off and be pretty formidable. Adding to it, the schedule at the beginning of the year, and I will say Colorado is going to be a challenge in week 2. You got to respect their skill players. But around that, it sort of sets up for this defense to take off very well statistically and it kind of launch themselves from that. So I think there's a thought that they can be a top 10 defense again. And then the question is, can an offense that was like 100 15th in a lot of these statistics? Can they be like 65th? You know what I mean? Like if you combine that with a defense that ranks 8th or something like that, and you even out the turnover margin, that's where the optimistic Husker fan says, okay, 5 wins then goes to 8 if you give me those metrics.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this, I don't think it's likely, but it is, possible doesn't necessarily mean probable, but there's even scenarios in which, like Nebraska, they could make the playoff. Like, I don't think that they will, but it's not in some simulations. It kind of comes out if you run. It's like, oh wow, yeah, look at that. Like Nebraska's sitting there 10-2 and the number 3 team in the Big Ten. I look at the schedule and Purdue, Indiana, Rutgers. It is UCLA in Lincoln, which is I think much preferable to having to go out and play them on the West Coast. And the travel looks pretty manageable. You get a bye week before you go travel to USC. I mean, it's like at Indiana. And if you're a team that's like not trying to win the national title, which I know Nebraska is eventually, but probably not this year, playing at Ohio State is kind of preferable to playing them at home because you're likely to lose it regardless of where you play it. So, you get them on the road means you get a more winnable game at home. Like there's no Michigan, there's no they don't get Penn State and they don't get Oregon, right? Like that's pretty nice. Yeah. Honestly, like this is setting up for Matt Rule.
I'll let you say that instead of me, Bud, because then it'll seem homerific if I say that sort of thing. But I think you're making fair points. The one thing I'd say is you're seeing Nebraska kind of pull up as like a fringe top 25 team where people rank them like 23rd or so. And I think right now they're that kind of fashionable team where it's like, okay, who's that team I can pick that's ranked 21st through 25th that's going to sort of look good, make me look good, and they've got the right sort of things. And if the metrics, just elevated slightly in certain things, they could be that. That's where I kind of put Nebraska right now. I think they can make that move by just cleaning up the turnover margin alone to like a 7 or 8 win team. And then beyond that, it's gonna take some special stuff. You're gonna have to have a freshman QB who kind of takes off right away and all that stuff. And I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I do think there is sort of an expectation with cautious optimism attached that like 7 wins and up is where it needs to head, or where they think it can head. The fan base, that is.
Absolutely, Brian. Really enjoyed this. We'll be following all your coverage there on Husker 247 and check out the message board and seeing who wins those fall position battles, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, bud. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great summer.